All right, let's dive into a version of history that you definitely didn't learn in school. We're talking about a dark, twisted timeline that kicks off with one catastrophic act of heresy way back in 1099 and spirals into an 800-year-long war against, you guessed it, the literal forces of hell.
So, I want you to start with this question. What if the biggest, most defining conflict in human history wasn't one country against another? What if it was all of us against all of them? Just forget the timeline you know. We're about to piece together a history of how everything went so terribly, terribly wrong.
So here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start at the very beginning, when hell first broke through. Then we'll cover the centuries of grinding stalemate that followed. After that, we'll get into the insane arms race between divine tech and demonic machines and the lightning-fast blitz of the modern era. And finally, we'll land in 1914 on the brink of what could be the final battle. Okay, part 1. Our story begins at a moment that should have been a massive victory for Christendom. Instead, it became the dawn of a new, horrifying age. It all started right here. The year is 1099. The First Crusade has just captured Jerusalem. But then the Knights Templar do something unspeakable. We don't know the exact details of this act of ultimate heresy, but whatever it was, the consequences were immediate, and they were absolute. The punishment for their crime was, well, biblical in the most terrifying way. A literal gate of hell rips open right in the holy city. Jerusalem is just gone, annihilated. And no, that's not a metaphor. This is day 1 of the invasion.
And the invasion is shockingly fast. In just 2 years, the heretics, that's humans who sided with hell, backed by armies from the Third Circle, have completely overrun almost the entire Levant. Humanity is immediately, desperately on the defensive.
Now, after that initial shock, humanity didn't just give up. Not even close. They dug in their heels. And this kicked off the longest, most brutal phase of the war. Centuries of a bloody, grinding stalemate, where humanity had to learn to survive in a world under constant siege by demons. Humanity had to adapt, and they adapted by forging a whole new culture based on perpetual war. The city of Antioch became the cornerstone of the resistance. Various Islamic factions united to form the Great Sultanate, holding the line at a massive fortified wall. And deep in the mountains, the legendary Hashashins held the fortress of Alamet for centuries against a never-ending siege. These weren't just battles. These were entire lifetimes dedicated to survival. And if you ever wondered about the sheer cruelty of the enemy, just look at what happened in 1117. 17 missionaries went into Hell's territory to try and convert the heretics. Their fate? Well, it became a symbol of the horrifying stakes of this war. They are kept in a state of perpetual agony, a living warning to everyone. You know, this long stalemate had a brutal rhythm. Humanity would score a victory, but then suffer a devastating loss. In 1215, the church literally starts fighting itself, which of course lets hell gain more ground. Then, in 1346, they unleash the Black Grail, a demonic plague. It's only driven back by a living saint, Jeanne d'Arc, in 1429. But any hope that brings is just shattered when, in 1545, the great fortress of Antioch is completely wiped off the map by some new, unknown infernal weapon. It was just a constant, brutal back and forth. The destruction of Antioch, that was a real turning point. The war was no longer just about faith and steel. It became a technological arms race, a desperate struggle pitting human innovation against infernal ingenuity. And the escalation was just relentless. In 1503, humanity develops orichalcum steel, this miracle metal that can stop any projectile. So how does hell counter? In 1666, they build a massive fleet, capture Gibraltar, and suddenly the entire Atlantic is their playground. England builds these huge coastal superfortresses to defend itself. But by 1866, hell, with a little help from a demon named Marbas, develops demonic submarines. The entire game of naval warfare changes overnight. But, you know, for all the focus on steel and machines, hell's deadliest weapon was something else entirely. The scale of the Black Grail it's just hard to fathom. We're talking tens of millions dead. It was a biological weapon of mass destruction that led to the horrifyingly named Corpse Wars. And the strategic impact of those demonic submarines was just as devastating. They preyed on merchant ships, effectively strangling global supply lines. The result wasn't just a military problem. It was global, widespread famine. Hell had found a new way to fight, starving humanity into submission.
So this brings us to the modern era. And here, those centuries of stalemate are completely shattered by a new kind of war, fast, coordinated, and just overwhelmingly powerful.
Hell's strategy gets brutally efficient. In 1894, they execute this perfectly coordinated three-part strike. First, they decapitate humanity's leadership, the Supreme Pontiff, the High Prophetess, and the Holy Roman Emperor, all at the same time. Then, while everyone is in chaos, they unleash a massive force of infernal tanks. And finally, they launch a two-front lightning war. This is modern combined arms warfare on a terrifying scale.
And the brutal reality of this new era is pretty clear. In 1805, England's legendary fleet is defeated, its greatest admiral killed. By 1872, the heretics have a permanent beachhead in mainland Europe. And even when humanity manages to fight to a stalemate, like at Cordoba in 1910, the cost is just immense. Ancient cities are pounded into dust by infernal artillery.
And so, after more than 800 years of this endless, brutal war, we arrive in the present day, 1914. The entire world seems to be holding its breath, as both sides gear up for what feels like it could be the final, decisive showdown.
Humanity's response has become just as extreme, almost tipping into science fiction. They start a church space program. I mean, what for? We can only guess. They've built a literal moving fortress called the Britannia. This isn't just desperation anymore. It's a wild leap into a new reality, all driven by the need to match Hell's terrifying power. And this brings us to the final scene. A vast, scarred no-man's land stretches across the world. And in this churned-up hellscape, soldiers from both sides are locked in these constant, furious skirmishes. They're not fighting for big chunks of territory anymore. They're fighting for scraps of intel, powerful holy relics, and any tiny little advantage they can get before the real storm breaks. So, that's where we have to leave this timeline, right on the knife's edge of total war. After 800 years, humanity has a space program and moving castles. Hell has demonic submarines and legions of tanks. The question is, when these two forces finally collide in one last massive offensive, what does that battle even look like? And maybe more importantly, who will be left standing when it's all over?